Here's something I didn't expect. Prime Minister, about Jacinda Ardern's period in office as Prime Minister of New Zealand, is the film that Eddington wanted to be. It is a film about how the 2020s took certain kinds of broad consensus about what's true and real, split it, and helped to splinter society even further into warring factions of lunatics. And that is very much what we see in Eddington, and in a less cynical way, it's what we see in Prime Minister, where Jacinda Ardern enters office as an extremely hopeful and optimistic figure, representing a new version of politics, and then she's snarled up in the most nightmarish way in the conspiracy theorists, the anti-vaxxers, the people who think that lockdown measures are Nazi tyranny, the people who call her Hitler. These people emerge halfway through the film, and they are way more terrifying even than the condescending people at the beginning of the film who tell her, what gives you the right to take on this job, when she's basically just been appointed by her colleagues and who were all elected to Parliament as per the normal system. How dare you? I mean, she starts out with those rather traditional sexist questions, but the later stuff is just so much more grotesque. And that shift from the dinosaurs of the 20-teens coming out to the sort of newfangled horrors of the 2020s, during and post-pandemic, is what this film kind of traces. And in that, it's immensely successful. And one of the strange things is, because the strange ways in which this film works, is because New Zealand is a small country, and as she says at the end, as a result of that, the Prime Minister tends to live quite close to her constituents, that you are in close proximity to the people you represent in a way that in other countries, the US springs immediately to mind, that's just not possible. That as a result, there's a feeling almost of the distilled, almost allegorical quality of an Eddington-style film, where it's a small enough community for it to feel as though everybody stands for a different feature of the community. Obviously, that's not true of New Zealand. I'm just saying it's how the film operates. It allows for a feeling of a closed off and extremely, literally sealed world during the pandemic, where certain kinds of global tensions work themselves out in unexpected ways. And so that's a sort of aesthetic principle of the film, that it's like, this is a small, intense world. And then it becomes a kind of political issue when the borders are literally sealed and this island nation becomes a completely separate historical theatre where things are happening differently. And that is fascinating, because as we watch the sort of underlying tensions come to the surface, I started to see as an outsider quite interesting things that I didn't know about New Zealand society. I had not ever considered in detail, and my bad, but I really hadn't thought about it, the relationship between New Zealand and Australia. Obviously, if you come from either of those countries, you'll be rolling your eyes at this point and thinking how ignorant, but I just didn't think about it. And the meaning attached to the fact that the Christchurch shooter was Australian, I found that really interesting. That comes out very briefly in this film. She doesn't dwell on it, but it seemed important. It seemed the idea that there was something about New Zealand national identity working itself out throughout this film. There were so many people quoted as things get nastier and crueler around the time of the anti-lockdown protests. There were a lot of people quoted saying, I can't believe these are my fellow Kiwis. I can't believe these are my fellow New Zealanders doing this. They shouldn't be part of our society. And I, as a Brit, where we have, I think, unfortunately, a much more cynical view of our society, I was really struck by that. I actually found it quite touching and heartbreaking, because I think you might get politicians saying, these values have no place in modern Britain. We do not support this in Britain. These are against what we believe. But I also think that people would not be as surprised. People would not be shocked by racist bigotry and violence in this country, we would be horrified, but I don't think we'd think it was an unprecedented thing. And I was really interested by that dimension to the film, because the whole thing feels like Jacinda Ardern's confrontation with darkness and loss of innocence, this is the narrative of the film, mirrors something that's happening in New Zealand during this time. And if you're from New Zealand, correct me if I'm wrong, and that isn't how it seems to you, but that seemed to be something that was happening. A sense of national self-identity was also under threat and under pressure, and that was working itself out through her. Side note, I'm calling it New Zealand. I am aware it has more than one name, but I'm calling it that because that's what Jacinda Ardern calls it throughout. As we go into the main part of the film, where we see her wrestling with the office, there is a whole other drama going on, quite apart from the politics, and that is the question of how a film like this even gets made. And I'd like to just finish up by talking about that, because what I found probably most interesting in this film is the unprecedented access, and that's because it turns out her partner is filming her for large parts of it. He's got the camera, and he's often talking to her, and she's talking to him on the camera. So she's waiting to find out she's going to be Prime Minister. He's filming her. She is wrestling with folders about COVID. He's filming her. And she's basically saying very politely, I was struck by how politely she was saying it actually, please go away. And I thought that was fascinating. I want to know more about how a film like this gets put together. I stayed on at the end where there was a recorded Q&A where she talked about how, oh, well, you know, he's a broadcaster, he's a documentarian, so he was always going to film some of this, but he didn't have any intentions when he filmed it to make a documentary. And I'm thinking, he's then credited as one of the executive producers. I'm thinking, really? Why was he doing it then? Look, I'm not inside their marriage, it's not for me to judge, but there's a whole set of politics around how films get made. And the result is that this film is caught between being a kind of candid documentary where something domestic and intimate is caught up close, and being something of a hagiography where Jacinda Ardern is presented as a person who embodies hope and optimism and compassion and goodness. And you know, a lot of what she does in the film, including its most moving section, which I do want to mention, which is around the Christchurch shooting and her incredible ambassadorship towards the Muslim community at that time, making sure that nobody doubted that the national family includes everyone. I thought that was wonderful. But, you know, even in those moments, I was thinking, I don't know whether I'm seeing a documentary about this woman or whether I'm seeing a political film about why she's the best Prime Minister ever. And we're sort of caught between these two. There's a tension between these two elements of the film. And I would just like to know more about how it got made and why it was made, because at the end of it, I'm still not entirely sure. But it was fascinating. It was shocking in places. And if you're interested in contemporary politics and you're interested in the history of the 2020s, it certainly tells that story in incredible detail.